So I think the elite coaches absolutely start with the vision. And it's not that you shouldn't go and you shouldn't watch other coaches and learn from them, but it's exactly what you said, Justin. You should say, oh, that's a really interesting activity, right? That's a really interesting drill. Thinking about my vision, is there a way that I can leverage the purpose of that drill? Right. Or what is it, even better, what is it that I like about it? What is it that I like about that drill? Oh, what I like about it is that there's like, we're putting players in these kind of situations. Okay, that's what I like. Maybe I could find a different way of getting our players in those situations. So I think the elite coaches have to do it. I don't think there's any way. I think the difference between winning and losing at the top level is so close that if you don't have that vision, you don't know the players to select, right? You don't know how to run your practice.
You are listening to the Bridging Impact Podcast, transforming leaders on and off the court with host, Coach Furtado. Without further ado, let's dive in.
So I think the elite coaches absolutely start with the vision. And it's not that you shouldn't go and you shouldn't watch other coaches and learn from them, but it's exactly what you said, Justin. You should say, oh, that's a really interesting activity, right? That's a really interesting drill. Thinking about my vision, is there a way that I can leverage the purpose of that drill? Right. Or what is it, even better, what is it that I like about it? What is it that I like about that drill? Oh, what I like about it is that there's like, we're putting players in these kind of situations. Okay, that's what I like. Maybe I could find a different way of getting our players in those situations. So I think the elite coaches have to do it. I don't think there's any way. I think the difference between winning and losing at the top level is so close that if you don't have that vision, you don't know the players to select, right? You don't know how to run your practice.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Bridging Impact Podcast. Today's guest of the day is Pete Steinberg. Pete is a leadership and innovation expert with extensive experience consulting with top Fortune 500 professionals. He has more than 20 years of experience as an elite rugby coach, coaching the USA women's rugby team at 2 World Cups and the Rio Olympics. He is now coaching the current coach as well. Fun fact, getting ready for the Olympics. So his new book is Leadership Shock, Using Authenticity to Navigate the Hidden Dangers of Career Success. So Pete, I'm thrilled to have you on. I'm thrilled that, talk everything from leadership and coaching. So welcome to the show.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So let's dive right in. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of leadership, I'd love to just, kind of get an understanding of how the sport of rugby has made an impact on your life.
I mean, probably like many people listening, it's difficult to, all of it. I will tell you, Justin, both of my wives came from rugby. So that's the sort of impact that rugby has had on my life. So, but I think in terms of like the way I think about the world, rugby is a really interesting sport in the sense that it's very player centered. So when I was coaching in the 2017 World Cup, we were playing against New Zealand and I was sitting up in the stands. And that requires me as a coach to set up an environment for my players where they can make all the decisions. They can understand the strategy, they can understand tactics, they can make adjustments, they can deal with conflict, and they can make all the decisions. I don't really have anything to do during the game. And so when it comes to being an executive coach and working with leaders in Fortune 500 companies, rugby in particular has, as a coach, gives you the skills to empower your team to make decisions. And so I think that's probably the biggest thing that I've learned from it is how do you empower others to be the best that they can be?
Great. And so let's dive right into there and empowering others to be the best that they can be. And that's probably just diving into leadership 101. What do you feel like that looks like in comparison to potentially a coach-centered team?
Well, I mean, okay, so this is like, you went straight into the philosophical view.
I know.
I coach for excellence. I don't coach for winning. Right. Okay. So throughout my career of coaching rugby, I never cared about winning. But I won 11 national championships with Penn State, with Temple, and with the Mid-Atlantic provincial side. I took a team to the World Cup. I never cared about winning. I always cared about excellence. And so excellence, I can control. Winning, I can't control. So that's sort of where I start. And then I think how do I really drive excellence? If I own everything as the coach, if I decide what the strategy is, if I decide what the tactics are, if I decide what our schedule is on game day, I have to then control all those things, right? Because I own them. But if I empower my team to develop the strategy, I work with them in collaboration to talk about what we do game day, right? I work within collaboration to talk about how we're going to run practice. If I do those things, then we have joint ownership. And then it's a lot easier. I don't have to own that anymore. They own it. They're much more likely to be motivated and to do their best when your players own things, right? When they actually have responsibility for things. So I think in a coach-centered space, there's huge pressure on the coach. They have to control everything, and the players get it easy. What they have to do is just do what the coach tells them. I don't think that's great for their development as humans. I also don't think it's great, particularly in dynamic sports, whether it's basketball or rugby, where players are making decisions. You can't take all of the control away from them and then in the game be like, why did you make the wrong decision? Right? You can't do that. Either you have to give them the autonomy, right, and the authority to make those choices holistically throughout the whole program, or you have to control it yourself. So I think, to me, the way to excellence is to give ownership to your players for their performance and the performance of the team. And then you end up becoming a leader and not a manager and create the environment where they can be at their best.
That makes that makes a lot of sense to me, right? Being a leader versus being a manager. And I've found that when I do give ownership to players, right, when it becomes on a team, they feel like they belong, right? And when you belong, you want to take care of what you belong to, right? Because it's, it's a part of you. It becomes a part of your identity, and there's like that sense of pride. And so kind of being able to shift that power dynamic over, giving some power to the athletes and the players. And so, when we're developing that, I think one of the things, as I was kind of reading into leadership shock, and maybe you can kind of go into some of the premise of the new way of thinking about leadership is you were talking about how it's an adaptable, continuous process of learning versus a fixed set of behaviors. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, and I think this is true. I've been doing a bunch of podcasts on for the book, and I was asked on a podcast. They were like, the question was like, "Are you a good coach?" That was it was sort of. I was like, okay, and my answer was, today I'm better than I was yesterday, and tomorrow I want to be better than I am today. Right. So I look back, even as when I was coaching at the Olympics or I was coaching at the World Cup, and I look back now and I'm like, I can't believe I coached like that. Right. It is a constant journey to improve. There is no endpoint. And in business, that's becoming more and more important because markets and talent and the world is becoming more complex and chaotic. And where it used to be, what we did last year is going to work next year. What we did today may not work a month from now. Like we have to be constantly adjusting our business, the way that we work. And therefore leaders have to constantly be reflecting and adjusting the way that they lead. And so, I can be the best coach I can be in the context that I am, or I can be the best coach that I can be in the business and the role that I have. Right. But if I get a different role, or if I coach a different team, right, I need to change the way I coach. The context has changed around me. And so that ability to be agile and constantly reflecting and improving, I think, is important. It's become really, really critical. Like agile leadership has become, you'll see it be the big thing that people are pushing over the next 10 years of leadership, is this idea of more agility.
That's really interesting, because my basketball philosophy of just how I teach the sport in general is teaching players how to be more adaptable, right? I feel like I don't know a ton about rugby, but I have watched a little bit, and I feel like, when you're giving players power, you have to give players power because there's not a lot of stoppage, right? You can correct me anytime I'm wrong, right? So there's a lot of decisions being made by players, right? Yep. So like you can do a bunch of cone drills where you're like, this is going to happen and this is how you respond. You want to teach them how to be able to react, right? And so it's a similar thing in basketball, right? The traditional way, excuse me, is, set plays, certain patterns run over and over and over again, right? That's kind of, I guess, coach controlled, right? You're running the coach's systems versus
Yep.
like, I read the player does X, so then I need to react to X, right? And you're almost talking about it now as a leader, right? And thinking about it. So I'm just curious, what are some great questions leaders and coaches themselves should be asking themselves after a day of practice on how they can improve, after a game on how they can improve?
So one of the interesting things that's really hard if you're a coach and it's really hard if you're a leader is feedback. It's actually really hard to get feedback, right? It's hard to get feedback from your assistant coaches because they want to stay your assistant coaches. It's hard to get feedback from the players because they want to be selected, right? And that's exactly like I was talking to a client last week, newly appointed CEO, and his comment was, "No one tells me the truth. Like, how am I supposed to know how I'm doing? Because no one's going to tell it to me." So that really requires your ability to be reflective, like after practices and games, because really you have to be your feedback loop, right? It's hard to get it any other way. So, I would always talk about, did we meet the objectives that we had, right? So that requires you to have clear, for the game or for the practice, did we meet our objectives? I always like to have principles of practice. Like, my principle is that we're way too concerned about teaching and not enough about learning. So I like those two things are different, right? So teaching and learning are two different things. Learning happens when the players do things. Teaching happens when I talk. Learning's way more powerful than teaching. And so one of the things that I always do at the end of practice is I say, how much did I talk and how much did they do? Because when they do, they learn. When they talk, they learn a little bit, right? So I think about what those principles are, and in practice, what I always reflect on is, because I think about deliberate practice. So I say, how game-like did I help with the drills? Like, did I get the drills to be as game-like as possible? Because the more game-like they are, the more likely they are to transfer skills. And so those are probably sort of like, the questions that I would ask afterwards. But it's kind of a hard, like that's actually a really interesting question, Justin. What do you think coaches should ask themselves? I mean,
I think so.
You're coaching coaches now. So what do you ask your
Right.
coaches
So I think
to
one of
ask
the things
themselves?
that I ask is similar, right? Being clear about objectives, right? How well do I feel like, let's say that, we're talking basketball terms right now. So how well do I feel like we got them to learn about how to become a better shooter? And it's kind of interesting that you talk about. I'll answer the question first, and then I'll get to that point. I think big thing is like what I try and keep it simple, right? Like, what did we do well today as a coaching staff, and how can we improve? Like, I'm always like, if you look at my notes from a camp or training or a club season, like I will have way more notes in my improve than I do in my do well. That's just because I always want to strive to improve, and so for me, and I'm almost going to kind of be vulnerable here, is like, I feel like I struggle a little bit. Like, I'm such a curious person on how I can, kind of be a better and optimize my coaching. And I want to feel like, right now, how can I help inspire my coaches to want to do the same thing and always wanting to optimize their coaching ability?
Yeah. One of the things, so I completely appreciate and recognize your desire to capture the things that you can improve on. But I think it's really important to capture the things that you do well because they reinforce to do it next time. Right. And so I would say with assistants or coaches you're working with, what I do is so first of all, I believe feedback needs to be two-way. So whenever I give feedback to a player, they also get a chance to give me feedback. Right? Because that's how I improve. And by the way, the first time you do that, guess what the players don't do? Oh, you're great. Everything's fine. You're the best coach I've ever had. In brackets, please select me. Right? But over time, some of those players will sit down and be like, I didn't think practice was very good. And here's why. Okay, great. But to open that up, and this is true for assistant coaches, I think it works really well. I always ask, what are two things that I could do well? Two things I did well at practice, and one thing that I could do differently next time. And the reason why you say one thing I could do differently next time is it could be something I did well, but do more of it, right? It's an easy way to open up into constructive feedback without it being oh, you did this badly, right? And I think
Right.
especially for younger coaches, giving them feedback, here's two things you did well and one thing you could do differently next time, is a good way of getting them on that journey of being a learner, right? And getting them
Right.
on that journey of being like, oh, this is good. Yeah, this is a feedback loop. I need this feedback loop. I want to get better. And so I think the way that you do the feedback is probably a good way of getting them on that learner mindset and that growth mindset.
Yeah, and honestly, as I hear you talking, I feel like the first thing would just be to prioritize that time to have that conversation with a coach, right?
Completely.
Instead of
Completely.
just, oh, taking off, right? We packed up, all the balls are put away, we're gone, we're out of here. Instead, we could spend 5 minutes, like really just five
Right.
minutes, right? It really doesn't need to take too long. We can get right to it, and that can then help us for the next day or the next whenever the next practice is.
Yeah. The other thing I would say, and we kind of, and this is actually in the book in Leadership Shock,
Mm-hmm.
because the book is about craziness. Like Leadership Shock is that the time my calendar's crazy, like it's really hard for me to prioritize. My team is crazy. Those are all symptoms of leadership shock, and it's called leadership shock because it's like the body being in shock, like the heart
Right.
pumps, I'm breathing, but I can't actually make the impact. And one of the most critical things in the book is we talk about we have a very warped sense of time, right? And we will completely waste our time doing something that isn't useful and then not do something that's really important. So I absolutely believe in coaches meetings. I think coaches meetings are almost more valuable than practice, right? But getting the other coaches to believe that that's worthwhile meeting, like going to the bar afterwards and having some beers, will definitely do that. But spending 30 minutes debriefing what just happened, really, really hard. So I love, and I think it's important, especially for experienced coaches with younger coaches, like talking about your process with them, having weekly meetings where you go on a bit of a journey. Like at the start of the season, you lay out the practice plan for the week, but by the end of the season, your assistants are doing, right? That's the goal. The goal is for them to be doing the things that, like delegating and empowering them to do it, but you take them on the journey. You don't do it the first practice. You talk through how you do it and you kind of take them on the journey. And then each of those meetings, there's a reflective piece. How do we do this past week? What can we do? What did we do well? What can we do better? And then a preview. What are we doing this week? What are we going to do at practice? I think that investment, that return on investment for those 30 minutes is like huge. But it's really hard to get people to do it because we don't actually think about how we value our time effectively.
That's a really great point. And as someone that's building out my business and recognizing, I think my biggest recognition right now and kind of my leadership shock is that I'm only one person. I can only coach so many kids, right? So I have like a club business, right, and training business.
Yep.
I can only, if I'm coaching high school basketball, well then I can't be training my 8 and 10-year-olds over here, right? So I have to
Yep.
learn how to train and develop other coaches so they can make the same impact. And it's similar to like with players, right? So I have to release a little bit of that control and start empowering my coaches, right, to go on their own continuous coaching development journey.
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember my journey. So I coached the Penn State women's rugby team for 19 years, and I remember early on, like in the middle of a drill, stepping in and correcting a coach, right? Because he wasn't running the drill the way I wanted him to run the drill, right? And that is such a short-term choice. That choice is this 10 minutes right now, which in the scheme of things isn't going to be that important, right? I got so focused on that versus, there's a great, so number one, check myself. He's running the drill differently. Is it still getting to the outcomes, right? Which I didn't do. And then number two, being like, hold on, what I want to do is I want this coach to be a really, really good coach. So like the most important thing is not what I'm telling him or her. The most important thing is how I'm telling him or her, right? And it's the how. When do I do it? Like, how do I start the conversation? All those sorts of things. And this is, again, like, I actually think there's I think about a performance ladder. There's coaching, there's learning, there's changing, and then there's performing. So our job as coaches is to get the team to perform. But what we spend most of our time thinking about is coaching. coaching is 3 steps away from performing. It's a long way away, right? So if I change my mindset and I say, what I'm focused on is getting people to change, whether it's my players, whether it's my coaches, or whether it's my team at business, if I'm focused on them changing and performing, it fundamentally changes the way I think about what I do as a leader or as a coach. Because now I'm not focused on coaching. I'm not even focused on learning. I'm really focused on how do I get these people to change? Therefore, what should they learn? Therefore, how should I coach? Versus what we tend to do is we start coaching first in the way that we think about it, right? But that isn't what we're trying to do. So that thinking about that and saying like, so if I go back to this, if I'm focused on that coach being a great coach, then I say, how do I get them to change? What do I want them to learn? And therefore, how do I coach them? Right? Which would not be if I'd gone through that process, stepping into the middle of the drill and telling all the players, this coach did it wrong. Let me tell you how it was supposed to be done.
Right. No, that's a really interesting point. Could you continue to elaborate and kind of expand on that and how you kind of give an example on,
Sure.
A performance, right? Because I'm actually pretty fascinated by this levels and it's making sense, but I need the gears to all go.
So, and this actually links to leadership shock. We're in a sports coach conversation, but in leadership shock, what I talk about is the concepts of principles, and they're like really principles of play, right? So that's kind of how I think about it. It's like, what are the principles of how we want to play? But I'll give you maybe a basketball example. I don't know basketball that well.
That's okay.
But I would ask, how important is learning to catch and pass in basketball, right? How important is it, Justin?
It's pretty important.
Okay.
It's fundamental.
So my challenge to that, it's only important based on the way that you want to play the game.
Right.
So for some people, the way they want to perform and the way that they want to play the game, it's really, really critical. Right. But for others, actually the way they play, which might be more dribbling, off the dribble, it might be a different, their approach to the game is so different, it's not as important. So we think of fundamental skills as things that everyone should do. And I actually don't believe in fundamental skills. I think there are skills that help the team to play the way I want the team to play. Right. And for sometimes, and those are the principles, my principles of play, right? And they're based on and this is exactly where in Leadership Shock, we have something called the authentic leadership model. And this is literally what I did as a coach, right? Which is like, if I looked through it, I said, in the model for a leader, it's purpose. It's like, what do I want to get out of it? But as a coach, it's actually, how's the game that we're being played? What's the game that we're playing, right? That's a really interesting question. Like when you look at under 10s basketball is different than under 16s basketball. Therefore, the way we prepare those two groups should be different. Right. So what's the game that we're playing? What are the strengths that we have? Like, what is it in our strengths? Right. What are my beliefs about basketball? What's my vision about how the team wants to play? Like you put all these things together and you come up with, and therefore this is how my team should play. And then once you have, this is how my team should play, then, and that's in the perform level, then you say, right, for the team to be able to play that way, what needs to change? Right? What do we need to change in our interactions with them? And then you say, what's the best way for them to learn those changes? And then you say, right, how do we coach them? Right? So you start with how do we want the game to be played? And you work back to what does that mean about how we coach?
It's almost like Stephen Covey's kind of begin with the end in mind, right? Having that principles of play in philosophy. And so I'm actually learning, I'm reading a basketball book, but it's talking about principles of play and really similar to kind of what you're talking about, just in terms of, maybe a little bit more X's and O's basketball language, verbiage, as you may say. But just picking, like if you have again, I don't know anything about rugby, but I'm sure, there's some quicker teams, right? Maybe your team's more powerful, right? Bigger, stronger. So you got to play to the strengths of the team. And then you got to develop, practice. Yeah, keep going.
So it's sort of like, some teams are going to do a full court press most of the time.
Right.
Because they're small and they're fast. They should practice different skills than a team that's just doing half court all the time. fundamentally, right? And so but what we tend to do, and this is the biggest thing, a biggest challenge that I have with coaches is that, someone will go and they'll get a chance to go and watch the Denver Nuggets practice, right? And they go watch the Denver Nuggets practice and they see this drill and they're like, oh my gosh, that drill is amazing. And they quickly write down the drill on the notepad and they come back to their team and they try to run that drill without any context about what's that drill trying to do for the Denver Nuggets? Why are they running that drill? You probably don't have the same team. Running that drill may not be as useful for you. I like the idea that we can photocopy drills that other teams run and then come back. And this is what I like. One of the things I do miss about coaching. I don't miss I miss coaching, but not a lot, because an executive coach, I get the same itch scratched. Like, I help people perform at the high level. I get to work with teams. So things like that can be really cool. But one of the things I really miss is the amount of innovation that you can come up with your practice. If you start from first principles, if you say, this is what I want to get the players to do, how do I get them to do that? And then how do I make it game-like? And how do I max the number of reps that a player can do? Because that's how they learn the most. Like, how can I do all these things? I can come up with a drill, right? And it's cool. That's so cool. And then it works. And you're like, oh my gosh, like, that's the bit. I love, like, coming up with really powerful activities that can really translate to the game. To me, was like one of the most satisfying things as a coach.
You get me fired up about kind of creating practice plans and, kind of diving into the nuts and bolts of it. And I feel like that's something that really is, you're talking about what is the purpose of this drill. And so I obviously I get an opportunity to work with other coaches and I've seen other things. And sometimes I wonder, right. And you're on social media, right? So you see all these different types of drills that are done. And so, I think obviously our first nature as humans sometimes is to judge, and then that maybe a coach will have a certain reason, like this player needs such and such. Just really diving into that purpose and starting with a vision. When it comes to that vision work, how often or how many coaches have you worked with? Do they really start with that in mind, or they just kind of go, this is my philosophy. I saw this from Villanova. I like the 1-2-2 and we're going to do this.
So, we talked about the Olympic rugby team, and the woman there is a woman called Emily Bidewell. And so she's done an amazing job with the team. The team's going to Paris. I don't know when this is coming out, Justin.
Soon. It's going to be before the Olympics.
Okay. So they're going to Paris, and they're going as probably the third best team in the world, which is the highest ranking we've ever had. And they have the best chance we've ever had of winning a medal, and they can win a gold. Like, they can beat Australia and New Zealand on their day. And if you look at Emily, she's done exactly what we've said. It's like, what's the game that is being played, right? Games evolve, right? So what's the game of rugby that's being played? What's our, she calls it USP, ultimate selling point. What is it that we bring to the table that is different, that gives us a competitive advantage? And for the US women, they're big, strong athletes. They're not as skilled as New Zealand and Australia, but they're big, strong, and fast, right? Therefore, if we understand the game that we're playing and we understand our strengths, what's the game that we actually want to play, right? And that's the vision that she has of how the team plays. But she has a constant feedback loop, right? So they have a full year season. They play 8 tournaments a year, and then normally a tournament in the summer around the world. And she has a feedback loop. So at the end of every year, they're like, oh, is the game that we thought was being played still the game? Have there been rule changes, right? Are there things that are impacting the way the game's being played? So I think the elite coaches absolutely start with the vision. And it's not that you shouldn't go and you shouldn't watch other coaches and learn from them, but it's exactly what you said, Justin. You should say, oh, that's a really interesting activity, right? That's a really interesting drill. Thinking about my vision, is there a way that I can leverage the purpose of that drill? Right. Or what is it, even better, what is it that I like about it? What is it that I like about that drill? Oh, what I like about it is that there's we're putting players in these kind of situations. Okay, that's what I like. Maybe I could find a different way of getting our players in those situations. So I think the elite coaches have to do it. I don't think there's any way. I think the difference between winning and losing at the top level is so close that if you don't have that vision, you don't know the players to select, right? You don't know how to run your practice. You don't know how to like physically develop the players. Like you might want players a little bigger, might want players a little lighter. Like it is so connected at the elite level that elite coaches have to do it. I would say at the recreational, right, or competitive, but not elite level, there's a lot of good coaches that have one view about how the game is played. They have one style of play, and that's what they coach to. And I think that's a challenge because it means that you're excluding players that could help you because they don't play the way that you want the game to be played. So I think it reduces your talent pool that you can select from. And also, I don't think it's as much fun. Like you want to evolve and develop, right? You don't want to be running the same game that you ran 15 years ago. And so I think having a growth mindset and a learner mindset will help you go on the journey to continually evolve your game and how you play.
No, I really like that. It's having an adaptable style, right?
Right.
You know, I'm not sure. I'm sure the game of rugby has evolved over the decades of years it's been played, or hundreds of years. How old is the sport of rugby?
I mean, it's hard to know. The first game in the US was in 1873.
Okay.
What I like to say, so rugby is the father of football. So in football, you have touchdowns because in rugby, you actually have to touch it down. You actually have to, like, if you get it into the end zone, but you don't touch it down, it doesn't work. And at some point early in the 20th century, the Americans were like, nah, you don't have to put it down. You just have to break the plane. You just got to get it in there. But we'll still call it a touchdown. Right. So rugby is the father. So it's been around for a long time, but it's always evolving. Like there's rule changes, there's adjustments, there's the way the game is interpreted. Like it is a constantly evolving game. And I think that's true of most games, right? Because the attack and defense, the attack learns to do something, the defense learns to stop it. So therefore the attack has to learn to do something else. Right. That's kind of like the evolution of all field invasion games.
Exactly. And then obviously in basketball, the evolution has really been on the 3-point line, right? You look at the analytics, right? Well, I'm going to put up way more threes because even if I make 33%, I have to make way less threes than in twos, right? And so it's just a more efficient shot if you're good at doing it, right? If you go 10, it's not a good shot. But that's story for
I think that's right. But you said something that's really important. I think that analytics in basketball has changed the game, right? Because now people, exactly like you said, people are not taking certain shots that they used to take, right? Because the analytics said they shouldn't take them. And therefore defenses are actually adjusting to that and not defending those spaces. Which means eventually people are probably going to go back to those spaces and start shooting them because the defense isn't there, right? So there's this constant evolution and adjustment that happens.
Correct. Exactly. And so it's always adapting. And I think I want to go back to one of the first points you made in the show when you were talking about how you focus on coaching for excellence versus coaching for winning. And can you tie that into kind of how you see the vision and, always adapting?
Yeah. So I'll do it by telling you a story. So I coached the Penn State women's team for a number of years, and we won the 2004 national championship. And in 2005, we went back to the national championship game and we played Stanford. And Stanford beat us by 40 points. Now, if you don't know anything about rugby scoring is similar to football. 40 points is a blowout. We were the defending national champions, right? And we lost by 40 points. Like, that's bad. So the following year, we came back after break because the championships are in May. We came back after break and we were like, all right, how the heck are we going to compete with Stanford? And we looked at everything. We looked at how we recruited. We looked at how we developed. We looked at strength and conditioning. We looked at how we ran practice. We looked at everything, right? And we just said, we are going to be the best team we can be. Right? And we are going to do everything to be as good as we can be. So we go through the year, we go into the playoffs, and we're scraping by teams like in the quarterfinals of the national championship and the semifinals, and Stanford is beating everyone by 60 points. Okay. We get to the final, we play Stanford. With 5 minutes to go, we're winning. And then they score in the last 5 minutes and they win a close game like 17-14. Okay. They had a woman on that team who called Jess Watkins, who went on to play for the US, like an amazing rugby player, better than anyone that we had, right? And she was just such a difference maker. And Justin, listen to this. She's now an astronaut. So very much.
That's awesome.
She played for the US, very much an underachiever. But amazing rugby player. And so for about 30 minutes, the team was devastated. And then after about 30 minutes, they were like, no one thought. The only people that thought we could win this game were us. No one else thought we would get within 50 points of them. We played our absolute best, and Stanford were just better than us. So we took that approach and we said, you know what? We will always focus on excellence. And so we set a team vision every year, right? We set a team vision, not of how we play, but what kind of teams do we want to be? And we never put winning in the team vision, right? It was always around excellence. So in 2000, and so that would have been 2006, we lost to Stanford. 2007, we won. We lost in 2008. No, we won in 2008. We won in 2009. We won in 2010. I don't want to talk about 2011. We won in 2012. Like, we just went on this run. We changed women's collegiate rugby. And at no point did we talk about winning. All we did was have processes in place to make sure that we were as good as we could be. And that actually made us better than everyone else. And so, and so that's really what focusing on excellence is. Focusing on excellence is, I can't control if we win. The other team just might be better, but I can control how good we're going to be. And so we're going to make a commitment, staff and players, to be the best team we can be. And if that lets us win the national championship, great. If it doesn't, we will all be satisfied, disappointed, but satisfied we did everything we could, like we did in 2006.
That makes a ton of sense. Could I get some examples of what you put on that board at the beginning of the season that, has not, obviously it has nothing to do with winning, because, you go through some teams, and I've done it like in the past, right? It's like win league, right? And so of course that word win is in, but obviously it's style of play. So I'm just curious what fills that.
Yeah. So in so we do, like, I would facilitate a meeting with the players, and I'll be like, how would you want to be described at the end of the year? Right? At the end of the year, what do you want your teammates to say about the team? Right? Maybe your parents to say about the team, and the opposition to say about the team. Right? And there are things that would come out that would be like, we want to be known as the fittest team in the country. Okay. If that's what we choose, that's going to change how we train. Right? We want to be known as like a team that plays a certain style. We want to be known as a great attacking team. We want to be known about a team that's welcoming, right? We want to be known as a team that maximizes, our potential. We want to be known as a team that commits to goals, like whatever those things are, right? So you would come up with your vision, and then we would lay out goals for the players. Okay, so you're going to do this. What does it mean about practice? Okay, well, at practice, we have to do some extra sprints because we said we want to be the fittest team. In fact, this is the best thing as a coach. You guys said you wanted to be the fittest team in the country. Therefore, I get to now run you more, right? Because that's what you guys said, right? But, what are the goals? What are practice commitments? Like, if you want to do this, and this is, I think, where most of us fall down, is that we actually assume every player is going to make every practice. And we set that. We say, hey, you have to make 90% of the practices to play. All right. Well, I'm now responsible for getting all the players there. But if the players tell me, right, hey, we think to play, you have to be 90%. You're like, okay, you guys have to help each other make sure you have 90%. Right? That's not my job anymore because you guys decided it. Right? So I get to select. I get to select on attendance, but I don't get to hold you accountable on attendance. Right? So I think there are just some things that you can do when you set those visions and then create some accountability metrics that can really change your culture.
I like that a lot. I'm definitely going to be stealing that. And I like that you talk about what are we known for, right? Kind of just talking about those characteristics. And I'm thinking back to one of our teams in the past spring that they were known, that it was probably our best performing team. It was not our most skilled team, but they had a defensive identity that like bought into kind of being, for lack of a better term, kind of nut jobs. They're very communicative and, but they loved playing for each other. And so they were the most bought in. There's also the group that I had worked with the longest too, right? So that always helps, right? So you build those relationships. And I really like this kind of process of what are we known as?
Yeah. And let's be honest, like, especially with younger athletes, like kids, that's really important to them.
Right.
Like that, that's probably more important than winning for some of them. Right. It's
Right.
like, what do we, and it creates, like, you use the term that I think is really important that we don't talk about enough, which is belonging. Like, this is creating a team identity,
Right.
right? That I can belong to. We're going to be known as this, right? And I am part of this team that is known as that. And I think that really helps create, and it's interesting because I do this work with executive teams. Like, I'll go with the CEO and his team and we'll do exactly the same thing. Like, what do you want to be known for? Right? What's your vision? And then what's your team name? Right? Like, I work with a group and they said, we're going to be called the Navigators, because what we're really doing is we're looking and we're finding ways for our organization to navigate this disruption that's happening. Okay, great. You're the Navigators. And they change their meeting and they have navigator meetings, right? It's really important to create teams because teams create belonging. And that's something we learn as kids when we're playing sport. And therefore, as coaches, it's our responsibility to teach the kids that that's what we're teaching them, because when they go off into the business world or whatever it is, we want them to be able to apply those team skills in a way that's really impactful.
That's huge. And so as we enter the last kind of segment of our podcast, I want to give you an opportunity, and for the coaches that are listening who may be teachers as well. And, coaching can be a very demanding profession, right? And so I feel like it falls directly in line with leadership shock in managing those priorities and the craziness. So can you give a quick glimpse and synopsis of what coaches would self-discover within the book, and any other tips and nuggets that you could share from the book that may help the stressed out coach right now?
Yeah. So first of all, I would say that the book is written so I would finish it. So I don't finish any business books. I barely finish coaching books. I get about a third of the way through and I'm like, I got it. I understand what you're trying to tell me. I got it. I know how to apply it. So it's written as a fable. So it's a story about a CEO. And it's his journey. But fundamentally, as I think it's very applicable to people that are coaching, and especially when you've got lots of different things going on, because leadership shock is when we're too busy and it's really hard for us to prioritize. And there's two things that you'd get out of leadership shock. So one is, where do I want to spend my time? What are my priorities? And what kind of leader or what kind of coach do I want to be? And the inputs to that are purpose, right? What is it that what impact you're trying to have in the world? There's role expectation. So what do people expect of me in this role as a coach? There's vision. What do I want to accomplish over the next 2 or 3 years? Right? That's one piece of it. There's a strengths reflection, which is like, all right, what am I good at? And how do I bring that? And then there's some beliefs, right? Some leadership beliefs. What do I believe about leadership? So you have these 5 inputs. And if you go through the book, you'll come out with, okay, I can't do everything. Like, it's impossible. But now what I'll actually have is I'll have a framework that helps me understand what are the 3 or 4 things that are really important to me. And the critical thing for this, and I found this in coaching, is that those are linked authentically to who I am, right? They're linked to my purpose. They're linked to my beliefs. They're linked to what I want to do. And therefore, it's a lot more sustainable, right? It's sustainable when I'm coaching for a purpose. Like, I don't mind putting in the extra hours when I'm coaching for my purpose, and I will find that fulfilling, right? I put in the extra hours because I find it fulfilling because it makes me feel good and it fills my emotional tank. If I don't make that explicit connection to myself, coaching can be very draining, right? It can be very difficult. I can find myself really struggling to keep my energy up because I haven't made the connection to coaching and why I coach. And so the authentic leadership model makes that connection, and therefore it makes your life more sustainable because you know why you're doing something. And so because you know why you're doing something, it brings more energy to you and it allows you to do it more.
That makes a ton of sense to me, because last week I had a full week of camp and then I had team coaching in the evening, and I was wondering the same thing. But, I also know that my goal and the goal of Bridging Impact is to bring on guests like yourself who are doing great work in terms of, like, our goal is to make as big of an impact on athletes, and I'm focused on kind of youth athletes, right? You're focusing on elite athletes and executives, but it's to make an impact, right? And so if we're
That's
able
right.
to kind of connect through that, it helps me get through that week and just understanding, like, okay, let's just focus on making an impact. I know we're tired, but let's make an impact on one kid at a time through 1 hour
That's
of
right.
drills at a time. And so it's brings everything within. So I really appreciate you kind of sharing that and bringing that in. Where can people find you on social media, and where can people buy the book?
Sure. So you can buy the book at Amazon or any of your online bookstores. You can find me at petesteinberg.com. I have a newsletter. You can sign up. I share some rugby stuff, some coaching stuff, some business stuff. And you can find me on LinkedIn for the business side, and for the rugby side, you'll find me at Twitter. So LinkedIn is Pete Steinberg as well, and Twitter's at Pete Steinberg is my handle. So you can find me there if you want to stay connected on what's happening at the Olympics. That's probably the best thing with the women's rugby team. That's probably the best place to find me.
Right on. Well, thank you so much today for your time and all your wisdom that you dropped. I'll be cheering on the women's rugby team this Olympic season, and we will stay in touch.
Thank you, Justin. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Bridging Impact podcast. We'd love it if you would like, subscribe, leave a comment and a review on whatever platform you're on. It's the best way to help us grow. We appreciate you for doing that. We'll shout you out on social media. I'd also love if you connected with me on social media. Let me know your thoughts. And this is why I do it. I want to share knowledge and wisdom from experienced leaders to people like yourself and myself, so we can have this dialogue and move forward, make an impact on the world. So stay tuned, stay subscribed. Cheers.